my mentor said to me, I was afraid to take the job. And my mentor said, just stay for a year. And whatever happens, 11 years later, here I am. At some point, I started teaching classes on campus and creating curriculum. At some point, I got a master's and a doctorate. And I have to say, the reason I love Reno is because it's been good to me. So I bought a home, I have a family. It's allowed me to do the things that I always wanted to do. Most important things. Just some challenges. So starting with microaggressions, there's 2 frames of reference that might move us out of what we think about microaggressions. The first is Chester Pierce, who is kind of a precursor to crit race studies, but Chester Pierce defines microaggressions as everyday racism, as opposed to a lesser version of racism. It's the things that happen repeatedly and that we experience as people of color commonly. Like it is mostly every day and things that people think about us. The second one comes from Malcolm Gladwell in Blink. And I love Malcolm Gladwell. He has a podcast. Is it Broken Minds? Basically, he works with Rick Rubin, and they interview hip hop artists and people who've been in the game for a while. And Rick Rubin himself has been there. But in Blink, Malcolm Gladwell says this. He references a scientist who changes the term microaggressions to microexpressions. And this scientist's research says that when you meet somebody in the first blink of an eye, they have feelings about how they feel about it. That are microexpressions, your face tells it. And I start there too, because sometimes somebody doesn't like you. Before you even said a word, you're like, what just happened? And that to me is where we could go with microexpressions and the things that people perceive about us. I have a couple more references, but because we have great other things to do and people to meet, I'll pass the baton.
Yeah, so hi guys, my name is Rayna. How I got to be VP of D&I for PRSSA. Well, being queer all through high school, I just constantly wanted to talk about my identity. So when I got to college, I got involved with PRSSA. I worked at a student-run firm, and our campaign was all about diversity. So that was my freshman year. And so from there, I just kept getting more and more involved in D&I work at my school. I'm sure you guys have heard stories of Florida, Florida man and stuff, and the type of people that we have here. So my big thing about coming to the University of Florida is I wanted to make an impact, and I found a lot of my purpose work through diversity and inclusion work. But yeah, so I'm ready to get more into the conversation.
Thank you for sharing. Jody, you can continue with after your 2, after Blink, and what was the first one again? Not Malcolm Gladwell.
Oh, so Blink, Malcolm Gladwell, and then Chester Pierce. That's where the term first comes from.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to go back a little, I think he's late 60s, early 70s. But it's good to shout him out because he's coined the term. Mm-hmm. Did anyone watch the Kaepernick special yet? I say special. Yet. I had to binge it because Cap is my student. I'm waiting for him to come for me in his special. Because we had that relationship where we kind of attacked each other, where we challenged each other. And the way he did his parents, I'm like, he's coming for everybody. Wow. So if you watch that, he brings up Chester Pierce, which I think is important. Okay. 2 other ones, and I guess it has to be a discussion at some point because I think that's the way we're going to learn. But it is at least talk through some of the experiences that we have. But the other ones I have, as far as reference, are Issa Rae. And so if you ever watch Insecure, I love what Issa Rae does. It's like she says she got this initial response that she wants to say, but she takes a moment and pauses and then gives the more, politically correct and or keep your job response. And I think that's why the workplace is important to go into, because these are places you have to come to gain your living. So you can't really just, because somebody's going to say, why don't you just ignore it? Or why don't you just keep going about your business and not pay attention to it? But if it happens every day, and if it happens in your workplace, it becomes something you have to deal with. You can't just be like, oh, I'm going to pass today. It comes to you frequently. And the other one, this is, watch on your own because the language is quite wild. It's Dave Chappelle, but he has a skit, when keeping it real goes wrong. And there's a series of when keeping it real goes wrong, but the one that I'm talking about, he talks about being successful, putting in extra time, achieving his goals in his career. And then one day he just snaps because of a microaggression. And at the end, he's at a gas station working because he snapped. And I think maybe more real for having experienced those things is maybe for 5 years you're cool, maybe for 10 years, but at some point it's really easy to snap. And you're just, it could be something simple that someone says to you. And in the skit with Dave Chappelle, it really was. And he just goes off. He just unloads on him. And he loses his job, his executive position. So I think there's a lot that I've said so far, and we got to kind of work through where it fits in anything. Mostly because,
Yeah, I want to ask Rayna a question. How did you become familiar with the term microaggressions, and how did it change your perspective?
Yeah, definitely. I think like a lot of people and more progressive terminology, we get it off the internet. And so once I was kind of able to label the type of things that were going on in my life, like tokenization, people like messing up with my pronouns and whatnot. Once I was able to label that, it made a lot more sense to me. Like, oh, there's actually a category for this. And being able to find people that relate to those same microaggressions was, really beneficial for me.
And Jody, how did you first become familiar with the term microaggressions?
so it's actually a point of, I feel like Academy deviates from real life experience a lot. And we sit and have conversations about stuff that people are experiencing that we theorize about, but it's a real experience. And so even more ironic when you have microaggressions happen in the workplace, either on campus or off campus, but in this ivory tower, you start to say, what's a microaggression? So I'm a BYU undergrad. BYU is a very theory-based school. I learned about critical race theory as an undergrad. I learned about theories that related to Black identity early, microaggressions, terminology. And I think like what Rayna said earlier is putting words and terms and to the experience that I had was so powerful at the start. And that's good, but I think we have to get to what are microaggressions? How do we face them? And then what are our responses? So at first, BYU was teaching me, bringing me in dope scholars all the time. You wouldn't think that it came from a religious private school, but there was a lot of theory and ideas that I would come across later in my diversity education. And then at BYU, I experienced them in real life quite often.
So Rayna, could you tell us about any experiences that you had experienced or witnessed a microaggression within school or maybe even family or something like that? And what was your reaction?
Yeah, there was this one meeting I went to where there was just microaggression after microaggression. The faculty here at my school have a inclusion, diversity, and equity council or something to that extent. And there was one meeting where they had student representatives come, and they just did not do a very good job of planning on how we were going to speak. So one of my friends she's Black, and she was asking questions, and absolutely none of them were being answered. It was just like, yeah, we're going to figure that out, whatever. And then the person who was moderating the conversation would kind of just skip past her. And so eventually I was like, well, going back to Jania's point, you never answered it. You just skipped past it. And, I think like being able to step in there and noticing, like once you know what a microaggression is, you just need to be an ally and like step in. But even then, once I got his attention, we had moved the conversation to stop Asian hate. And so I'm half Asian, but I know that a lot of people you look at me, I have white privilege, like I get that. So you could look at me and just think I'm white. So I had brought up like the Asian hate stuff and saying, I'm concerned about my family, and you guys we don't receive support. Like we're kind of just letting it go. And there's a lot of people, I even have friends at my college who were affected by Asian hate crimes during that time period. So it was just like at a time where we needed a lot of support, and I brought that up. And I was told that I brought up it was one of the prominent stop or Asian attacks during that time, and I brought it up. And one of the moderators was like, well, we don't even know if that's like actually an Asian hate crime. And it's just like hearing things like that, where, you know, you're overlooking people of color and kind of just completely disregard. And it was from a like white guy. So it was just completely disregarding people of color's concerns about what the college was doing for us and kind of just brushing past it when, you know, these things are extremely important. That was just one instance, but I have many more.
Thank you. I'll ask both of you or whoever wants to answer first, but why do you believe it's important for people to be aware of their biases and prejudices?
All right, ready? Rock, papers. Here. You want to go first?
I mean, for me, I know we're on microaggressions, but what you said, and I think I did not hear your pronouns, so I just don't want to use the incorrect pronouns. What are your pronouns?
She, they.
She, they. Okay, cool. So I think as we get into it's deeper than microaggressions. You're starting a conversation that's about racism. And I think we spend a lot of time, especially in this type of environment, trying to be the most politically correct, the most palatable to everyone. And we can't say that something is racist. And yet some microaggressions are so clearly racist that you gotta call it that. And so you can't just be like, oh, and I think because we do perceive microaggressions to be lesser racism, but they still have the same impact over time. In higher ed, I think we use, in a lot of places, we use deficit model thinking. And I think that we gotta get to see people for who they are deeper than thinking the negative things about them. So I would go as far as to say that in academic spaces, microaggressions in the classroom, I call them classroom violence. Because your experience to me is painful, but it becomes more painful to me when it's in the classroom and someone doesn't respect my intellectual, my time on task. And it's like, they already see the negative in me. And to me, Black is beautiful. So what was your question? I wasn't.
No, it's okay. You said your own thing, so it's okay.
Oh, what was the question? Because I was leading to it.
You were leading to it. Why do you believe it's important for people to be aware of their biases and prejudice?
That's why I did that. So all of those things, period, comma, and in teaching this over time, there is a self-reflection piece. So most definitely, to get to an endpoint where we all understand each other and talk to each other, we all have to look inside. There are different power dynamics, but the one that I actually have landed on after this many years of education, after this many years of experience in diversity work, is trying to get rid of internalized oppression. And so because it's so learned that even I pick it up about myself, and that it's everywhere. I would say a microaggression or a racist thing is that I don't see images of myself on this campus. That's not something intentional for the most part. But if I can't see myself reflected anywhere on this campus, or very few places, if I don't find Black positive images, then I'm fighting what I think is there aren't Black men in education. And so it's important for us to know our own biases, because sometimes they're aimed at ourselves. The most deep and impactful ones are about us. And so it's the work that I'm doing. And I couldn't even tell you how I'm doing it, except for acknowledging that I internalize this stuff. Those things that people say about you, you can deflect them for a while, but at some point they come right home to you.
Yeah, that one hits really close to home for me. Like over the past year, my real battle has been like battling my internalized homophobia, because I found myself making jokes like, oh, I'm not like other gay people or something like that. And it's just like that internal just hatred of yourself and just trying not to identify with that. It's a huge battle. And you don't find people who don't battle microaggressions like having to just take time to like unlearn all the hatred that was put into them. Like this is a whole other thing that we have to work through and deal with, and even go to therapy for. So it's just like it's important because like it's damaging, it adds up over time like you said. And yeah, it's important to recognize it, like, and teach people early on that you can't be saying these things.
I think one of the terms we do a lot is imposter syndrome. We use, so if we're going down a list of terms that are associated with microaggressions, it's that internalized oppression leads us to believe that we are less, or to doubt ourselves when we are achieving. I don't think it's all the time, but it can definitely pop up where you achieve something and you're like, how did that happen? And so some of the most deep microaggressions are like, I used to have, I worked in the pre-law advisement center at BYU, and I sat in front of most of the white students who were trying to get into law school. I would help them get into law school. And they would come to my desk and they would say to me, these Black students are taking my seat. I'm like, do you know what you're looking at? Like, how are you gonna say that to my face and with a straight face? And then a lot of them did it. That could be perceived as a microaggression, but they didn't have any problem saying that. So that seat was for them. Yeah, you got to deal with it every day. How do you fight that? And then you might think I'm taking someone's seat. Never did I think I was taking someone's seat. But I heard it enough that it could get into your head, and maybe it's down the road. Did I really achieve this? Was it given to me? Those kind of things that Rayna, I think that the doubt is the biggest part, and that's why it's more than a microaggression. It's racism. Like in your head, when racist things happen to you, you got to be like, was that just an accident, or was that really intended to hurt my feelings? You don't know. So you got to clean that space up. Like maybe you have to ask straight up confrontationally, did you mean to hurt me when you said that? Because not knowing hurts.
I have a question on that then. What do you kind of come back at with when people say, well, don't take it personally. I wasn't intending to cause harm. I wasn't intending to insult you, even though it does. Like, how does that conversation change?
I got an answer.
I mean, you did though, like you did cause harm. Just like take accountability, I mean, honestly, I'm pretty blunt with people, and I'd just be straight up like, you know what, this is how you made me feel, or like this is what you did to that person. I don't know, I'm pretty blunt, so I just feel like that's what you did.
Yeah, I think the best way to handle that is to straight up say, your intention is irrelevant. It still made me or someone else feel wildly inappropriate and out of place.
Yeah, if the intentions and the actions aren't really lining up, like, I mean, take accountability. Yeah.
I mean, that's the whole reason of bringing up Issa Rae to me, because Issa Rae tells you right off the bat what she wants to say, but then she does the more, and this is the workplace too, because they can happen other places when you can decide how to deal with it or not. But when it's your job, or it's your boss, or it's people, like, there's power here. You can't just be like, screw you sometimes. Sometimes you gotta address it or suck it up. And the sucking it up that's not really good, but I think that we're talking about it. I kind of want to know yours, and this is why. Because sometimes the hurt isn't because of what they said, it's because of how it shows you your power is. Like, when certain people, and right now, to be honest, I feel like the swing is the other way. Under hate speech is protected under free speech. And we don't know where that line is. So people can say hateful things and show hateful symbols, and they're not going to get checked. I almost want to just bring up Gruden, because in a weird sense, because Gruden lost a lot of money for things that happened in 2006. And that's kind of strange for us to cite. In recent years, things that are very past microaggressions are just brushed off and supported. So if you try to fight against it or say it doesn't, it's everywhere. And it's sustained, like someone could fly a flag, and that flag, it could be the US flag. And now that flag symbolizes certain barriers to my success politically. What the hell? Like, that's the US flag. So sometimes microaggression and the Supreme Court in Johnson v. Texas, where they said you could burn a US flag as symbolic speech, also said that there are things that are symbolic speech. Going back to microaggressions, believe me, there are times I know that I'm not that, I can tell people do not like me. I gotta work with it. We gotta go forward. I can't just be like, okay, well, you don't hurt my feelings. Sometimes it's more than your feelings. What if that person is your advisor in a doctoral program? Not mine. My advisor is that. Well, can I finish? But what if you put your whole life into it? What if it's a master's? What if it's a professor? What if someone who mad has power over you? And you can't just shrug your shoulders and be like, I'm done with you. You gotta go direct, you gotta go into those places. Matter of fact, a lot of my friends in grad programs say that it happens more in their classes than in their previous education. So as you go up, you experience more microaggressions. More educated people, more microaggressions. That shouldn't be the same. I think I answered that.
After hearing your response, I do have to put a warning. I have gotten myself in trouble for being blunt, so just be very careful. Exactly what he said about who you are doing that with. I think a lot of my more same level people would be the ones committing microaggressions. Those are the ones that are like interacting with me more daily. So it's easier for me to be blunt. But yeah, if it's someone that's, above you, then it's into question like, how do you handle this when they have power over you? And yeah, I don't know.
So what's some advice that you would both give to those who are experiencing microaggressions within the workplace? Like, who should they talk to, or how should they respond?
I'm gonna go first. You're first.
Me first?
Always.
Okay. I like the question, what do you mean by that? And just seeing them like stumble with their words and whatnot and like trying to backtrack. When you have it in the workplace, like we're talking about before, it's kind of difficult because you don't want to like stir things up to a point where you aren't respected or getting, or you like lose status within that workplace and whatnot. Like that's not what you want to do. But I think that people do respect it, when you're firm and direct, but like you just maintain that like polite, respectful tone. Like, what do you mean by that? Oh, I mean, and then like they respond or whatever, and then explain like maybe why that like hurt you or like doesn't fit, like, or isn't right to say that. But I think that like sometimes those things just aren't really avoidable. And so like sometimes, yeah, you do have to like take it on, and that's just another microaggression added on that someone has dealt with. So I mean, for me, a lot of it's taking time to myself and like knowing who I am, and that like microaggressions like aren't defining me. But yeah, that's kind of my approach to it.
So I think I think the danger of using the term microaggression is that we tend to individualize the behavior. So at some point we could be at fault as individuals, but I think why we're going to Chester Pierce in my estimation is that it's systematic, that institutional racism exists. And so in a perfect world, I'll give you like our past president, who is teaching right now, in Don't even, I meant to say you and our president.
Okay.
Our past you and our president. When we would raise concern, because at some point, some people think language is powerful. Some people think terminology is lightweight in a microaggression. But if you use the N-word in my space, I'm associating that with physical violence. And so someone could be like, oh, I was just playing around. But when I hear that because of my generation, I don't take it as, oh, I'm just joking around with you with that word. Like it goes from zero to blood. Like when people have called me that, it's about fighting and making me move. So sometimes these squeaks and concerns about microaggressions aren't just like, oh, you hurt my feelings. It's like, I feel like I'm in danger right now. So our past president would say, you got to contact Title IX in that situation, right? And the system in Title IX is going to respond to you in like 4 months or 5 months, and they have work to do. Maybe they'll respond quicker now. It's a different university. It's a different people in Title IX. But the system sometimes does not respond. So if you go, you might get retaliated against. So you're thinking to myself, am I going to risk putting myself in jeopardy because someone in power over me is going to find out that I squeaked and they're going to come for it's going to cause me more damage. And I just think if you're looking at the past couple of years here on our campus, sometimes the damage done wasn't the actual incident, it was the university's response to the incident. And so you want to say, oh yeah, you just go and report it to Title IX, or you keep track of things. The truth is, that might be the end of you. And so my advice to people, which is common, and I kind of, something you said earlier is like, I might have a response in the exact moment, but I promise you, I have my squad that I'm gonna go tell what happened. And we're gonna say, oh, that happened to you today. Daily, we're gonna unpack the stress of it and say, that happened to you? No, this is what happened to me. Can you believe it? So we create those systems and those networks of support. But on what I might say to someone is, and a student who was really a student, she's a great student leader on campus, brought me her resume recently. I thought this was an amazing resume. And she said, will you critique it? She said, somebody told me that I had too much diversity work on my resume. This is actually a really amazing resume because I see a lot of student resumes. And I said, you know what? You have to decide how you represent yourself. Because some people will see this as a very pro-Black resume when it wasn't really, it was just, maybe some just clubs and organizations. So professionally, I'm an organizer, to be honest. I organized in the Bay Area about immigration reform. And so in major ways, I'm an activist. And so there's a line here, right, where you say Black, where you say diversity, and where does social justice come into it? So when you get tired of microaggressions, what do you do as response? What I say is if you don't watch what you do in your workplace, you will not be progressing. And people have told me that I've said too much, been too much of an activist in my workplace, that I will not be promoted, that I will not be seen as the candidate for any kind of promotion. And so the danger is how you represent yourself. Do you take your resume and represent yourself as less diversity? In a day when we're supposed to be hiring diversity people, when this is post George Floyd, and believe me, it's different. In a day when you're supposed to be able to value that, you might need to pull back because people will not see you as intelligent if you are an activist or if you bring social justice issues to the workplace. And like I caused it, right? Like I caused your microaggressions to come to me. You just got to be careful.
I'll ask you both, how do you create an open and welcoming environment where people feel safe and included?
Do you mind repeating that? She said, can you repeat
Can I
that?
repeat it? Yeah. How do you create an open and welcoming environment where people feel safe and included?
I mean, the thing that I always preach to my friends like on exec at UF was like whether you like it or not, you got to be open to people. You got to go up and talk to people. What I noticed like for okay, let's just take our PRSSA meetings for example. Like the same people would just hang out with each other, and it was the people on the exec, and they were all pretty much white. And I was like, how are we supposed to make people of color, people of marginalized backgrounds feel comfortable being here if we're not being open and welcoming to them? And so I think it starts with like body language, how you interact with people. I think if you're like, just make an effort. If you see someone sitting alone, like I usually like to go up and bring them over to hang out with my friends. Those are just like small things that you could do in your daily life, especially like at these meetings. Like if you see someone like by themselves, just see like, hey, like my friends are sitting over here, you want to come over? I tend to do little things like that to make sure people feel included. And definitely like once they come over, like include them in the conversation, like, hey, we're talking about this, like what are your thoughts on it? Instead of just like bringing them over and like standing there.
This is my shameless plug for the Multicultural Center. So I brought the codes for our social media. And I work in a multicultural center. I actually, in my previous advice, choose to label my scholarship Black, to label my scholarship hip hop, to embrace. It's because I can't like water it down for people. To embrace the fact that I've been part of a Black student organization, Black organization since I crawled. And so instead of trying to make it palatable for people, I just have to be myself. And so in a multicultural setting, and by the way, come to the center. Has anyone been to the center lately? We just got 2 murals. Did you go?
I saw you guys painting the walls.
Yeah, so the one from the summer is a evaluation of Indigenous women and the land, and how Nani K. Trask is painted a huge face, and she passed away. She was a Native Hawaiian rights activist who the University of Hawaii just apologized to after she passed for the things that they did to her. But above it, it says, "I am not American." Welcome to the center. Today, because we have, I don't know how many of you were here when we had the swastikas going up in Church Fine Arts? And did you see the faces that were painted there? It was a group of students, Filipino students, who are artists, and now one of them is actually painting Kaepernick in the center, like today. It's so powerful. But it just happened today, like overnight, he painted it. And I think that's symbolism too, right? So I want to say that the center, I think our director is Jose. Our director is saying, we're not going to try to make this, and we battle about the name of all the place, right? We're not going to make this an assimilated space in order to make people feel comfortable. We're going to come with the messages of Indigenous women and Indigenous people. On the bottom, it has images of girls and boarding schools. Kaepernick is obviously contested as a figure, not really represented on this university, but now his face is on the floor of Joe College Student Union in Nazareth. So I think sometimes you have to be who you are, and in a multicultural space, that doesn't mean that everyone's going to get along. Like if we really say we're about diversity, like let's bring in people from who have different thoughts, who have different cultures, and let's exist together. We had Hillel there for bagels this morning. Like some of those conversations, you want to be like, how do I not have a microaggression? But I'm gonna use Addie as an example, who's the Hillel director. She makes you feel comfortable to ask questions, and then walks you through it. And sometimes you can't be that super PC person, because we do have cultural differences. There is a history. I'm gonna stop answering so long.
No, I really like your answers. Yeah, definitely like calling people in is a big thing that I practice, making sure, just calling people in, like bring them into your space, share your experiences with them. I think that just like vulnerable vulnerability, I can't speak right now, is like such a powerful thing with people, like just 100% being able to be yourself. And my thing, like, I try to be as myself as possible. I can't think of the word right now. Authentic, as authentic as possible. And I feel like that just brings people in even more, because when they see that real side of you, they're like, oh, this is no BS. Like, this is for real. Like, they're actually, trying to like be my friend and not just doing this for show or anything. So yeah, just being 100% authentic, and calling people in is pretty much what I practice for sure.
I think, Rayna, one thing that you said earlier about intersectionality is massive important in the space of creating, because we're so, as an institution right now, we want to have a Black diaspora program, we want to have a Latinx program, we want to have an LGBTQ program. And what happened is we do these graduate celebrations that are cultural. And I had students that could go to like 3 of the grad celebrations because they were Black, Latinx, queer. Like, how do we represent who we are in a space authentically when, you know what, can I bring queerness into a BSO? And I'm straight, I'm cis, this isn't my experience, my students tell me, I'm Black and I'm queer. I can't be Black in the QSU and I can't be queer in our BSO. So how do we, in authenticity, sometimes it's tough.
Yeah, 100%. And I felt that too, because we have, like at my school, we have the Asian PR Society for students or whatever popping up and stuff like that. And it's like, even in those spaces, being biracial, like I just can't completely relate to everything that's happening. And then, yeah, definitely, like you said, the intersectionality comes in, and you don't hear like topics that cover, it's usually just that white cishet experience that we hear about. So it's like really difficult to relate. And yeah, like even, for having speakers for PRs to say, like most of the speakers that I remember hearing are like white, cishet, straight, like just not people that I can relate to. So how can we like create that space and be like more thinking about people with those intersectionalities for sure?
So that discussion I just named came from, we started a mixed student discussion once a month because we realized that our campus it's the second largest population and growing after Latinx. And numerically, there are a lot of students who identify as mixed. And so it's going really slow, but right now there are a lot of mixed students on campus. So how do we, I don't even know if we can say that, but we do it anyway. Trying to make that space.
Yeah, I mean, that's actually extremely cool for me to hear, because that's just not something I see at all here. Like, I see another Asian and I'm like, oh my God, a unicorn, like someone that's like me. So that's cool to hear that you guys have mixed races and a lot of diversity.
I stole it from Oregon State and UC Davis. They do like a mixed family week, or Oregon State does a lot of scholarship. They publish and study, even UNLV some, but we do also like a Afro-Indigenous event, or we're doing Blasian events. And so we did a Gaysian event. We're trying to bring people in. And if there are people here, we should do who are represent our students, I think.
I love that idea. I might bring it to my school too.
Can I ask you what's up at UF? Because that's actually an interesting place.
Yeah. Well, it's a predominantly white institution. It's very white. It's, ruled by SEC, being an SEC school, a lot of Greek life here. So there's a lot of issues with it, but I do feel like from even being a freshman to now, like I'm a junior, like the difference that I've seen thus far, I'm excited for the people that get to come here in 5-10 years and so on. A really big issue that we have though is because Greek life is so prominent, those are the people that get to make the decisions a lot of times in student government and get to influence the upper administration. And so obviously we know that like Greek life was founded on, to be like exclusionary and to just leave out people of color and to only be for like white people. So now that these such powerful groups of people are still ruling our school, it does make it difficult. But a lot of people, especially within the College of Journalism, are trying to move that. We have a student newspaper called The Alligator, and I don't know if you guys saw this, but recently two of our law professors weren't allowed to testify on like a court or something because it conflicted with UF's interests. And so the entire like the student body is like fighting back on that. And so I do see like positive light where, you know, we're advocating for our freedom of speech, for our professors' freedom of speech and things like that. But like 2-3 weeks ago, somebody vandalized the Black, there's like, we have like houses, one for the Latinx community and one for the Black community, and they vandalized the sign outside of the BSU. Yeah, I think that's what they call it. And so there's still instances of that. So right when we think that we're seeing like positive lights, we get pulled back. But I know that there's a lot of students that want to see change.
That's cool. I mean, it's the South, you know, like this, one thing I believe about the South, and people tell me, but you know, I don't live there right now, is that people are more upfront about it. And so it's easier to identify who might be against you because they're gonna say I'm a redneck, or they're gonna tell you straight up I'm racist. Is that true in academia?
Yeah, I mean, there's this one class I had where this kid was sitting in the back, and he was just like typical frat boy, and he was talking about it was like a research class, so he's talking about like his research or whatever, and he's like, yeah, I'm gonna just be real with y'all, like I voted for Trump, and then just kept going like it was nothing. And like, I don't know, that was just a lot for me. I was like, he just like said that, like he admitted that openly. And so like, yeah, people are kind of like, yeah, I'm conservative, like Republican. And I don't know if you want to equate that to racism, but like based on the previous presidency, there was a lot of not so great things coming from that. So yeah, I mean, and you see Confederate flags around a lot if you're driving. There's places that I won't stop to get gas, things like that.
That's what I was kind of talking about. But we're in the Mississippi of the West. If you come to my neighborhood, there's a lot of those flags too.
Oh, that's fun. Yeah, I mean, one thing that's great is that in college towns, so like in Tallahassee with Florida State, here in Gainesville with University of Florida, and then Orlando and Miami, people too tend to be more progressive and like more open and whatnot. But then, you know, when you drive in between those cities, you can definitely see like the stark difference in how people dress, act, the way they look at you. I mean, I grew up in Orlando, so even coming to Gainesville, which is like kind of redneck, like kind of a hick town, that was a big change for me because I grew up in Orlando, which is like super progressive, and you know, it's got Disney. Disney has gay days, like that's what I was used to. And so even though Alachua County is progressive, being at UF, there are people that come from all over the state here, obviously. So we do have people that are like pretty openly, you know, not nice.
But when I think of Orlando, I think of Pulse. Pulse nightclub.
Yeah.
So also in a place that's progressive, then you have a mass shooting, which is, I mean, I think we're getting to like microaggressions. Are they leading you to these, to know what people are thinking that want to do further harm? You know what I mean? Like, did you just let slip? Are you innocently, accidentally saying something? Or are you do you say this in your home? You say very overt things in your home, but publicly you're going to be a little bit more. And I think in the West, what we deal with is that people don't let you know very clearly. And so you get little microaggressions and you're like, oh, should I pay attention? But you might never find out.
Yeah, I mean, based on my experience, it's a lot of okay, well with Pulse itself, I feel like so that was obviously like awful. That was a terrible thing that happened. But what it did was it elevated the voices of the LGBTQ community in the area. And so I think that if anything, like Orlando has just strengthened its community in that sense. People, I mean, I went to a Pride event like 2 weeks ago, I think, and people are like still talking about it, but it's still something where we can come together and take up like entire blocks of a city and have our pride. And it feels like a safe space because it's just one strong community that went through this horrific event together. And like that is an awful thing that happened, but I think the positives that came out of it were that it only strengthened our community and made us like more proud of who we are.
What,
So sorry.
what's up? Cause I'm gonna have a conversation. I'm like, I wanna know what's going
This
on.
is so interesting, actually.
Yeah, I mean, we have like less than 10 minutes, so if you guys, does anyone else have any questions that they want to ask?
How do we change the, sorry,
No.
it's kind of like I'm talk. How do we change the dialogue with individuals who are just plain not willing to want to have a less parochial perspective?
You know what sucks is that a lot of times people need to know someone that has gone through hate in order to feel empathy towards it. Like, that's such an awful thing that happens, but like, I don't know. I've found a lot of times I act out with emotion a lot, and like, that's just not the correct response at all. But I've found when I can like logically explain things like in a, I don't know, this is such a difficult question. Do you want to take it over?
Wait, are you passing? I totally,
I'm passing it.
just for a second, then think, no.
I'll come back. I'll come back. Let me think.
Okay, okay, because, okay, there are moments, I guess what's the harder part is in public spaces, in workspace, we give certain discussions a certain amount of time, it's measured. Promise you, on my way home tonight, I'm black, right? Like 24 hours. And I could be pulled over. I've come from Boy Scouting events. It's a reality. And so whether most during George Floyd, because for years I was teaching most in HDFS, to be honest, so it's mostly white women who will be teachers or working for social service agency. And so I'm cool, I've done this, but during George Floyd, I wanted to pull into my community. I just wanted to talk about it because there was a foundational reality that we understood. To me, not saying all black people have the same reality, but it helped to be there, and I didn't want to be explaining basic things to people. But my answer now would be that over the years of teaching, and I guess when someone gives you an hour of their time to do a diversity training in a workspace, it's kind of frustrating because you can't get very far in total, right? Like that's only the work they're willing to. And sometimes people will sit there and roll their eyes at you when you get invited for an hour. It's good, but I started doing consulting with the school district, and then we would do 6-week trainings. And actually, by the end of 6 weeks, you can make some progress. Then I decided one of the most important reasons I stepped into the classroom was because it's a 15-week semester. So what I realized is individually, if you have time to process things, if you have time to listen, to read about boarding schools and talk about sovereignty and learn about the tribes in Nevada, and then talk to people from different tribes, you might come to an awareness. And so I stopped trying to judge people initially. And I know that at the end of 15 weeks, whether or not we understand, we at least have heard each other. And it's really cool because I give props. Like in one of my classes during a Trump election, one of my students was a white man from Carson. And you could tell he was dying in this diversity class, but he came every week. And he told us right off the bat, I'm a Trump, I voted for Trump. My family all believes we're Trump supporters. And what that meant at the time, we didn't know as much as we got to know towards the end. But the man stayed in there. You know what I mean? Like, you don't know, and after George Floyd, which I don't know if it's, so many of my students who have been in my class, white students and didn't understand what we were doing. After George Floyd, they called me, they emailed me, they said, your class was helpful. Now I know what you're talking about. And so you just don't know who will come around once they learn something. And as long as they're not really hateful, want to shoot me type folk, then you gotta give people the benefit of the doubt as much as you can. That's why I like academia, academic freedom. You would be surprised some of the things I say in my diversity classes that give people a chance to be who they are if they're cishet white. And that some of our dialogue makes people not want to talk about racism, because if you're white and you bring it up, you might be called a racist for bringing up race. And so you have to kind of open the box and then just trust that, you know, down the road, people are young right now. Not everyone's a hater, but you know, they have room to grow. Student development.
Yeah.
I'm smiling under my mask.
All right. Yeah, so conversations and education. In one of my outside, like a different student organization, we host this event called Ascend every month, and everyone can come and we talk about, you know, whatever topic it is that's chosen that month. So like for November, we're doing Transgender Day of Remembrance. And, you know, everybody can contribute to that conversation. The questions are always formatted in a way that's like, what do you think about this? And we encourage everyone to participate, and it's like a safe space, and creating those safe space for people to have that conversation, because if you don't hear what they say out loud, you are never given the chance to call them in, and maybe even like if it's something that, if it's a hateful thought, to maybe call them in and help them understand why that is harmful and how you can better approach that. But yeah, I totally agree. Like giving people the opportunity to speak and giving them the opportunity to educate themselves, even because some people just aren't given the resources when they're younger to learn about anything related to marginalized communities. So yeah, having those spaces, being able to hear people out. Sometimes it is tough to hear some people out because you're just like, you sound so dumb. But if you don't hear them out, you'll never be able to call them in.
I like that one.
Thank you.
Anything else, any last minute words of wisdom?
You know I have some.
I know you do.
You didn't have to guess. Switching frames, tones, voices. Black is beautiful to me, right? So all of this discussion is kind of like the negativity that surrounds my identity. But for me, Black is love. For me, it's my grandmother, my father, my aunts, my uncle, my family, my cousins. So I definitely have places to go where I don't have to defend, talk about microaggressions. And even to this point, it's like kind of describing and explaining it. But my reality is Black. And so it's a beautiful thing. And I think we don't get there enough. And I just had before, that's my piece, right? Like I love Black people on this campus. We say we're not enough. The people who are here, we just partied. So Black joy from Thursday night till Sunday with Black alumni. And I'm not joking about partying. There was a lot of partying, like what you perceive it to be. And much love for that weekend. Was it work? I don't know. I had a good time. Did we have to get the fish and do all the logistics? Yes, but there are good things here happening. And so as much as there are microaggressions, it's still beautiful to be Black in this country. I still, you know, at the moment people get shot, you get a different feeling. Your family goes to jail, it's a real thing. But we have a lot of moments of love as well.
Rayna, any last words of wisdom?
I wish I could just like retweet that entire thing. But yeah, I mean, there are times when it's hard, but it's like most of the time, my entire identity, like I wouldn't change a single thing about it. Like I love being queer, I love being biracial, like I get to experience some really freaking good food, and then like I get to be with my girlfriend and I'm like obsessed with her, and like that's just not something I'd get anywhere else. And so like being who I am is like kind of the best thing in the world. And those are my positive thoughts. I like we do go through some stuff, but end of day, nothing of it would ever be changed for me.
Thank you so much.